So this is more on a theory of IAM and bit of concepts related to it. After this, I'm going to give you some hands-on part related to IAM, and from now on, of you know, from starting from today, we are going to work a lot between services. So, for example, when you're working with one service to another service, there is something called permission requirement. For example, if you're working with S3 to CloudFront, you need your CloudFront to be able or to have the permissions to access S3, right? It does. There is no case where you can have one service in AWS talk to another service in AWS in your AWS account without you allowing that service to do so. So, in case there is a service in AWS, right, you will not be able to access your own data. For example, if you are logging into your EC2 instance, you will not be able to access data in your S3 until unless you allow EC2 to access that data. And where do you allow that you can say permissions? You do it in that service, but using IAM. So IAM is identity and access management. So there are two parts: identity and access. This is a different, or you can say a similar name to what AAA is, and we use AAA a lot in different you can say IT environment, where the first A is authentication, second A is authorization, and third is accounting. So these three are critical part of IAM. However, IAM only provides you the first two part of AAA, which is basically your identity and access management, only provides authentication and authorization. The third part, accounting, is provided by another service called CloudTrail logs. So CloudTrail provides you the accounting part. So whatever you do in AWS, you will create some CloudTrail logs, and I will show you today. So we'll cover the concepts of AAA today in part of identity and access management. So as I mentioned, authentication, authorization, and accounting. What is authentication? Basically, authentication means who you are. Think of it when you're accessing any, you can say, any company, premises, you would have an identity card, right? That identity card serves the service of, you can say, who you are. Now, generally, if you're talking about an infrastructure security aspect, your card would be having a different form of color. Mostly, access cards are color coded in different colors, for example, green, yellow, red, etc., for different zones. Now, that color defines, for example, for a green color, you might be an employee, you would be only able to access the employee part. Similarly, for example, yellow color would be visitor, they would be only allowed to access the reception and common area parts. So that is what authorization means. What are you allowed to do? And the last part is accounting. What you are doing, everything should be logged. Whatever you are doing, everything should be logged. Think of it as a security cameras in the building, which would tell us where you are accessing and what you are accessing, as well as whenever you are using your ID card to access a building, it will generate a log and store it somewhere that you accessed that building on that day. So generally, how we authenticate, we use username and password. The other way is certificates. Uh, Authorization is done after authentication. It will check whether you are authorized to do some sort of activity. And then last part is logging, which is basically what services you are going to log and where you are going to keep those you can say details. Now, generally, what we do, we basically divide users into different form of groups, right? So, for example, we can have developers, we can have infrastructure engineers, we can have finance, we can have different form of groups, and these groups will have different sort of permissions, right? This makes it pretty easy for us to manage permissions. Basically, if we go for individual user level, it would become very difficult for us to assign those permissions. But on group level, it becomes easy for us to manage the permission. So mostly users are part of some groups, right? And then, as I mentioned, in AWS services, you need access, for example, at individual levels. or at group level, right? Or you also need permissions between services. So that permissions are provided by roles. So what are roles? Roles are basically how either user or other services are going to access those, uh, you can say, different services. So it can be a service, it can be an individual user, or it can be a group. You can use roles, you can create individual users, you can create individual groups, but these permissions are assigned to roles. Any questions till now? So let's talk about IAM features, which is basically a fine grained access control to AWS resources. Uh, you already know about MFA. You can analyze access. You can integrate with your corporate directory using Microsoft AD groups or anything else. Now, these are some of the terms related to IAM. So we have users, right? We have groups. We have permissions. So we talked about users and groups. Permissions are, you can say, what users or groups are allowed to do. Auditing, as I mentioned, is performed by CloudTrail. uh, Password MFA, I think you are aware of. Roles, IAM roles for services. I mean, as for example, if you want to access data in S3, what you need to do, you need to assign a role to that EC2 machine so that it can access that content in S3. So you can also use sharing. You can share the roles to different services. And then there is a policy, which is a JSON document that guides the permission and principles. So we are going to talk a lot about policy today because this is what you are going to be asked in the exam. All right. So this is, you can say, a policy that IAM policy looks like. Any questions till now? So whenever we have a policy, it is a JSON document. This is a JSON document, JavaScript object notation. So it is something like YAML, JSON, XML, which are data serialization languages. So first thing is version. So this version is basically policy versions. Now every policy can have different type of version as well, right? So this version is specifically on what type of IAM policy version we are talking about. This is not the date that you are using. This is specifically what type of IAM version policy we are talking about. Generally, it is same. If you want, you can have different policy version as well. Then there is a statement. Every policy will have some sort of statement. Inside a statement is a list. So when you see in a JSON document, this is a list. And these are key value pair. Key value pair means what are the various, you can say, attributes of this policy. So what is the first key value pair? Effect. So effect can be either allow or deny. There are only two things that you can do in a policy. That is, you can either allow us, you can say, action, or you can deny an action. So what we are doing, we are allowing an action. By default, everything is denied. So when we write a policy, you don't need to, explicitly write, for example, effect. If you do this right, this is an explicit deny, but implicitly means this is already denied. Deny. Think of this as already there in AWS. So think of AWS has already AWS already have this policy. So what now you are doing is basically allowing the different actions. So you don't need to write the top one. Everything is denied by AWS between services. So you allow, and what is the type of action? EC2 describe. Now you will think, what way I can get this? You can say what actions are supported, what type of actions there are. So there are thousands of action in each resource. All right, it's impossible for you to you can say memorize each and everything. this is much more logical. So if you want to, remember, there are certain actions. For example, there is get, right? Basically you are trying to get some object. There is list, where you are trying to list any object. Describe, right? And then you will have uh, put in case of S3 bucket, where you are uploading it, and then you have delete. So just remember these type of actions. Everything else is somewhat related to it. Get means you're trying to get a resource. List means you are trying to list some resource. It may be list of EC2 instance, it may be list of S3 buckets. Describe is basically where you are getting the details of anything. Put is to upload, delete is to delete a resource, right? So these are type of the actions that you can do. So actions is basically your resource and then what type of action category it is. If you put a star, you can do all the describes. Or if you do this, you can do everything on EC2. So this is a wildcard. So with wildcard, you can override any type of permission. If you do this, you can do anything in anywhere in AWS, which is what you should not do, right? So ideally, you have to specify what type of, what you can say, category of operation you are allowing, and then you can use star. Like for example, describe load balancer, describe uh, any type of services. You can just put a star here. And resource, anything related to EC2. So this means whatever resource you have in EC2, you can use it. Obviously, this EC2 describe would only be applicable to EC2 instance, right? So any EC2 resource, you can use this action. Similarly, this is for elastic load balancing, describe. Then you have CloudWatch, list matrix, get matrix, describe. So you can also do list star, and which is perfectly fine. The only thing that you should be very careful is if you do so if you do this, which means you can delete any type of you will have access to all type of delete resources in CloudWatch. All right, and then you have this auto scaling. So any question or any concern in this policy statement? I will show you how to generate these policies, but any question in understanding this policy statement?
So the policy statements will be always in like not the GUI based. Always we have to do in XML or any language.
Yes, policy statement are, you can generate them using GUI. I mean, you can specifically generate. I will show you how to do it, but
Mhm.
these would be always in a JSON format.
Okay.
And in the exam as well, you will get at least one question with where you will have some sort of policy statement there. Okay, so let's get started, and I will show you how this works. Let me go to my, okay. So I'm logged in with my root user here. So let me go to IAM. You can do it with your console. I mean, whatever IAM user you are using. So I just wanted to give you a brief overview. So I think we already covered the MFA part. These are the IAM resources: user group, user role, policy, and identity providers. Let's start with identity providers, which is very simple. You can use SAML. SAML is basically a form of integration that you can do with, for example, if you're using Okta or any form of, you can say, provider. Or the other one is OpenID. For example, you can use it with Google or any other OpenID provider. So these are, third-party providers that you can integrate with it. Integrate with your AWS account. For example, you can integrate with Semantic, You can integrate with you can say Okta, these applications using these identity providers. You can also use Facebook, etc., using OpenID. So if you want, you can connect with Facebook and Google login. So that's how websites have login with Google or login with Facebook. They integrate with OpenID or another sort of identity provider. So where the website provider does not need to store your identity information. Right. So then there is user groups. So as I mentioned, you can create any group. For example, I can create a group called developers. I can assign users to it, and then I can assign these policies, right? So let's talk about policies first. So if you go to policies, let me create a policy. And what I can do, this is a visual policy creator. And the other one is JSON, where you can, just write the statement. So let's go with the visual one. You can choose a service. For example, this is the S3 service. And you will have all this list of actions that you want to, allow or deny. So what is the effect? Allow or deny. So let's select with allow. And if you choose all S3, this means it will specify everything. And if you choose all S3, and if I click on next, so this is S3 full access. So I can type S3 full access and I will create a policy. So if you search for S3 full access, that's the policy that you have created. It is a customer managed. It is used as none. I can see here, and you can check in JSON. And what is the policy detail? Allow S3 star, and this is resources star. This SID is statement ID. You can use it to track if this statement ID. I mean, for example, if I edit it, I can just change it to 1, and I can just say, for example, S3 list star. That's it. So I can update this policy. So in this way, I would be able to track, okay, this is the version 1. This is for personal, you can say, tracking of the policies. Okay. So I've just created a policy. This policy is not attached to anything. I can attach to entities, right? I can attach to, for example, if I go to EC2, I can attach to EC2 instance role. All right, so I've attached now this to EC2 instance role. Let's see what this EC2 instance role is. Let's go to EC2 instance role. Now this is a role which can be accessed by any EC2 instance. All right. I have attached this policy S3 full access, and there is Amazon EC2 role already there. Whenever I create a kind of an EC2 instance, if you go to EC2 instance, and if you go to instances, and suppose you start launching an instance, there is an option where you can select the role. So I will not spin it up, but I will show you where you can spin up a role, the IAM instance profile. So here you can specify the role that it will attach to. This means whenever your EC2 instance will be online, right, will be up, it will have the permissions, whatever I have defined in EC2 instance role. And what I've defined in EC2 instance role is S3 full access. So now any EC2 instance that I spin up, which has this role attached, will be able to access the S3 bucket. Any question in this one? So don't worry about it, because this will be ongoing. Every time we are going to work with in the next session, we are going to talk about loosely coupled architecture, where we will use SQS, SNS, etc. We will use a lot of IAM. So I just want you to be comfortable with the language, with the you can say different you can say keywords here. We are going to use it a lot in upcoming you can say hands-on part. So any questions in this one? What this S3 policy is? All right. So if you talk about policies, you can see there are some already AWS managed policies here, and you can filter it by customer managed and AWS managed. So AWS managed are already provided by AWS, and you can use it because it would have a specific function already associated with it. You can in fact check what is the JSON document for this one, and you can copy JSON and use it into a different file. So whenever you are creating any, you can say, as I mentioned, cross service access, you need to create a role. So suppose I want to create a role. Now I can have a service talk in my AWS account, or I can have it talk to another AWS account. So for example, I can choose another AWS account, just put the account ID, and it can talk to any other service in that AWS account, depending upon the permission that you have provided. It can also choose a web identity, for example, as I mentioned, using Facebook, Google, etc. And it can talk to an application which is hosted in Facebook, Google, or anywhere else. So for example, let's create an AWS service. So this is a role that I'm going to create, and this is for EC2. And let me just create a policy. For example, let me just search for this policy. Let's take this EC2 full access. So if we have this EC2 full access, which is basically for this service, I can just write test role, test EC2, and then I will create this role. So this means this already exists. Okay. So this means any EC2 instance can access any of the service in any of the services which are provided by EC2. All right. So this is a role that I can attach to the EC2 instances.